I need to find out if Joanne needs help with her quilt tomorrow.
Okay.
So it's going to be a crazy day.
You're going to get your nap in?
I have to get my nap in. That's a must.
Okay.
So you need to let me know what time we're going out tomorrow night.
Okay.
I was born on April 25th, 1942 in Murray, Utah, at the old maternity hospital. My parents are Scott and Orpha Brown. I don't know where I lived. I don't remember anything about a home until we moved to Richland, Washington during the war. And my father went there to work.
Which war?
Second World War. My dad graduated from Utah State University in forestry and was a forest ranger for quite some time. And then I don't know if he was a carpenter before he went to Washington or if that came after, but afterwards at least he did carpentry work. I remember the home we lived in Richland vaguely. I was 3. I remember coming home on the train with my mother and older brother, and I fell asleep on the train and rolled off the seat and broke my collarbone. So sometime after we got home, my father built a basement home across the street from my Soph grandparents, my mother's parents, on 3rd East in East Midvale, a little dead-end street. And my grandfather owned a great deal of property there. And so he gave my parents a ½ acre, and my father built a basement home, which we lived in. I remember sharing a bedroom with my 4 siblings. 2 of them slept in a double bed. 2 of us slept in a single bed. And the baby, Ronaldin, slept in a crib. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath basement home. My father later built a brick home on top of the basement. We lived upstairs, 1 bathroom, 3 bedrooms, 8 people, and he rented the basement to different families. I feel like I had a pretty good childhood. My grandparents' property was bordered on the north by a creek, and we used to love to play over there. And I used to love to play at my grandma's house. She lived in a big 2-story home with a big porch on the front with large pillars. And so it was pretty nice.
My full name is Irvin Ray Herman, and I was born in the Salt Lake County Hospital back in September 3rd, 1946. I grew up in Holiday. My mom and dad bought their house the year I was born, so I lived in the same house my entire life until I got married and moved out. And in Holiday in those days was nothing but a bunch of fields and apple orchards and peach orchards, and me and the guys in the neighborhood, we always had a good time, and we always had lots to eat because we'd go in and raid the orchards whenever things were ripe.
Like apples, or what were you guys eating?
Oh, they had apples, we had Bing cherries, we had pie cherries, we had peaches, we had pears. There was a field across the street full of apple trees, and then right behind that was an empty field. We all played baseball in there. We'd get together in the summertime and get everybody in the neighborhood and play baseball. That's where I got knocked out one day running into a fence post after a fly ball.
Did you catch it?
No, I was out cold. It was clear over to the next field, and I was running, and I didn't see this great big fence post. And I ran right into it because I was looking up in the air watching it. And then
How old were you?
I was about 11, I guess, 10, 11.
Okay.
And then for fun, we used to have wars. We'd divide up into teams, and in our backyard was a willow field with lots of willows, and we'd get about a 12 or 14 foot willow, clean all the branches off of it. Then we'd go over to the apple orchard and we'd get green apples and stick one on the end of it and then fling it at one another. And if you got hit with one, you had a bruise for days because it was coming at you at a couple 100 miles an hour. And then when we got bored with that, we'd take our BB guns and shoot at each other. We used to have all kinds of fun. We'd get firecrackers all the time. And we'd take firecrackers and we'd hollow out an apple and we'd put a firecracker in there and we'd put it in a slingshot, light it and shoot it up in the air and watch it go off in the air and blow apart. Oh, my dad's name was Ann Herman, and he worked a lot of hours. My dad would go to work every day, sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning, and work straight through until 4 o'clock the next afternoon. And he liked doing that because he got paid double time and a half for the first part of the deal until 8 o'clock in the morning, and then from 8 till 4 in the afternoon when he got off, he got regular time. So it gave him quite a bit of extra money to take care of his family. He worked at the North Salt Lake Stockyards, and he was the handyman out there. And he could build just about anything. He poured a lot of cement. He built most of the barns out there. He taught me a lot of how to do woodworking. When you get called out, it's because they needed extra help. And the hog trains or the cattle trains or the sheep trains would come through from the Midwest. And by law, they had to stop them here in Utah and unload them, keep them for 48 hours, pen them down, feed them, and then reload them. So that's why he would go out early in the morning, because those trains had come in. Every once in a while, a train had come in with sheep in it. And sometimes the ewes would have babies while they were there. They would ship the lamb on and keep the babies at the stockyards. My dad would bring them home, and we would hand raise them with a bottle and feed them. And when they got big enough, we'd send them out to Goshen to a friend of my dad's, and he'd finish raising them for us. My dad always taught us that he didn't like to be wronged, and to be upfront with people and do what you should. But if somebody cheated you or did something illegal to you, he would really get upset. And I know several people that he never spoke to again the rest of his life, because if somebody wronged him, that was it. But he would go out and help anybody do anything, and he'd always take us with him. If somebody had a broken furnace and needed it replaced, we'd go out and help him replace it. If they needed anything, my dad would always be the first there to help. Well, my dad was not a real loving person, but he took care of us. And he loved to fish and he loved to hunt. So when he'd come home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a lot of times, he would get me and my brothers and he'd say, "Let's go fishing." We would do a lot of fishing. We'd go up Mill Creek Canyon or Big Cottonwood Canyon, or sometimes over on the Weber, someplace close where we could get there in a short amount of time. And in those days, you were allowed 10 fish. And most of the time, between all of us, we'd bring back 40 trout. And we would freeze them, put them in the freezer. And then when we all got old enough, I know for my Christmas, when I was 15, I got a .30-30 Winchester hunting rifle that my older brother had also gotten, and my younger brother ended up getting. And we would go deer hunting. And so if we all got our deer, that's what we mostly ate all winter long, was peaches and pears that my mom put up, and deer meat and fish. So to this day, I don't care much for deer meat, and I don't like eating fish. Her name was Elsie Winard, and she loved to cook. My mom was always cooking, and I loved to help her. We would make our own homemade noodles. We'd lay them out on the bed on a sheet, let them dry. She made everything from scratch. Whenever we brought home apples or pears or pie cherries, she would always make us a pie, a cake, or whatever out of it. When we were in school, every day that we came home from school, there was always either a cake or a pie sitting there waiting for us. And my older brother, who almost always managed to get home first, whatever was there, he'd cut it in half, and he would take half, and the rest of us, we had to share what was left. Even after he was married and moved out of the house, if he came over and there was a cake or a pie there, he would cut it in half and take half home with him. Well, my mom was always the soft touch. Whenever we wanted anything, we went to my mom, and we'd get her to convince my dad. She would always do things for us, and on our birthday, my mom would always take us out, just her and us, one at a time, to wherever we wanted to go for our birthday for dinner.
I started working for my grandmother when I was about 10. She moved down the street by the creek because my grandfather, who worked for the Union Pacific Railroad, was in an accident and had both of his legs amputated above the knee. And so they built a home down the lane that was flat. So I would go on Saturday mornings and work for her, cleaning her house, dusting and sweeping and doing odd jobs. I graduated from that to working for Mrs. Cuney, who lived on 7800 South and was in our ward. And I would go to her house Thursday afternoons after school, and I would iron and clean and go next door to her mother's house to make carrot juice and celery juice and beet juice. They were into that, she and her mom. When I was 16, I got a job at the A&W on State Street and 7500 South. And from there, I got a job at Woolworth's downtown, where I rode the bus, and I saved my money so I could go to college. I loved my dad. He had a temper, but I managed to avoid it for the most part. I loved sitting with him in church because he always put his arm around me. And I loved going grocery shopping with him because he always let me pick out the kind of ice cream I wanted. And it was always orange sherbet. My mother was very hardworking. She was not quite as affectionate as my father was, but she always made sure that I towed the line. Once in a while, over the years, I managed to work around that a little bit. For instance, she told me I was not to go steady with anyone while I was a teenager. Well, I managed to go steady with my high school heartthrob, Michael Heineke, and I just kept his ring in my pocket when I was at home. He let me wear his, I don't know what it was. It wasn't his class ring. It was another ring. I wrapped tape around it so it would fit my finger when I was at school.
I have an older brother and an older sister that were born before my dad got drafted in the World War II, where he went to Germany, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and his unit got overrun, and he got a citation for helping to evacuate soldiers under fire. And then when he came back, I was born, and then I have a younger brother and a younger sister. I wasn't the brightest bulb on the tree in high school, and I realized that I barely made it through elementary school, and I barely made it through junior high school. Mostly C's, D's, and once in a while a B. But when I got into high school, I had been working for Ronnie Wagstaff since I was in the 6th grade. And when I got into high school and got my driver's license, I started working for him, driving heavy equipment, bulldozers, cranes, 10-wheel dump trucks. And I realized in high school that I wasn't the smartest guy in the school, and if I didn't do something, I was going to have a rough life. So I really knuckled down and went to work. When I graduated high school, I graduated with almost twice as many credits as I needed to graduate, and I had a B+ average. But I had to work hard. I don't see words the way other people see them, and I have a hard time spelling.
Is that dyslexia?
That's what they call it, but back in those days, they didn't know what it was.
Okay.
So
You had to work really hard to get.
I had to work really hard to overcome that. Really having to work hard to memorize things, because I just couldn't look at a word and spell it, so I had to memorize it. So I had to memorize a lot of stuff. But I was always really good in math. I always got straight A's in math, got straight A's in shop, metal shop, woodworking shop, auto mechanics shop. I took all of those. I took vocational carpentry because I was going to be a carpenter when I got out of high school. And I built a couple of houses, helped build a couple of houses with a crew. And then after I built a house in the wintertime in Utah in December and January, I decided I didn't want to be a carpenter in Utah anymore because it's too cold. I really enjoyed being on the track team. I worked hard on the track team there. And one of the times I used to watch the Olympics, and there was a Russian high jumper named Valery Brumel, and his record was almost 7 feet. And one time in high school, I was able to get over 6 feet. And I thought that was really something, to be able to jump close to what the Olympic medalist was doing. But
So you were a high jumper.
yeah, high jumper, and I ran the 220.
Wow.
But I didn't like running the 220 because every time I ran the 220, after I got through, I would be spitting up blood for a while because my esophagus isn't big enough to bring in air and out fast enough, because I still have my tonsils, and I've always had them.
And my father sat me down the summer before college. I had been accepted at BYU. And he said, if you want to go to BYU, you have to have at least $1,000 saved, which doesn't sound like much now. But that actually paid almost for my first year of college. So I worked while I was in college at the student bookstore, part-time, and I worked every summer to make sure I had my housing and tuition paid for a semester, and then my job at BYU kept me through the year. So when I finished college, the only thing anyone else had paid for me was $50 my mother paid 1 month to help me while I was student teaching and couldn't work at the bookstore. I remember when I was younger that I always wanted to be a dress designer. I was always drawing clothes, and I was always making paper dolls for my 2 younger sisters. I learned to sew quite young, and I made doll clothes for them. But in order to be a dress designer, I would have had to go to LA to the Institute there, and it was very expensive, and the thought of going that far away from home with not knowing anyone just frightened me. In those days, girls generally became nurses, secretaries, or teachers. And since both of my parents were teachers, I opted to become a teacher, and I taught 2nd grade for several years. I loved college because I finally felt like I was someone besides Scott and Orpha's daughter. I had always been Scott and Orpha's daughter. I made lots of friends for the first time instead of just sticking with one tight little group. And I went to a lot of social events. My friends and I would go to the dorm dances every week, even though they weren't for our dorm. And I met a lot of very nice young men. One thing that I recall from college that I think is kind of funny, as I look through my pictures, I have one certain dress. I made it for my high school graduation. It was white, long sleeved, high neck, very full skirt. And I took it to BYU with me, and I wore it to about half the dances I went to. Fortunately, I went to the dances with different guys, so they didn't see the same dress every time they took me. As a senior in college, I dated Lynn for my whole senior year. We were getting very serious, and when I fasted and prayed about it, I had absolutely no doubt that I was not supposed to marry him. He was such a good man, but he was a perfectionist, which may not have played well with me because I am not. So then I taught school for 3 years after I graduated.
I graduated from high school in 1965 in June. I worked the summer for Ronnie Wagstaff. I drove dump truck and topsoil for 12 to 16 hours a day all summer long. Then when he got cranes later on that summer, I started operating cranes. And then on December 24th, 1965, I got a letter from the President of the United States that says, "Greetings, you are hereby drafted into the military."
Is this Vietnam?
Yep. So on January 25th, 1966, I went up to Fort Douglas along with about 300 other guys, and we were drafted into the Army. And we spent all day long filling out paperwork, having our physicals, doing everything we needed to do. And at the end of the day, they took us all into one big room. They lined us up all around the walls, and they had 2 doors, one on each end of the room. A sergeant came in, and he started at one door, and he went, "Army, Marines, Army, Marines, Army, Marines," all the way around the room. And he said, "The Army goes out that door, and the Marines go out that door." And I ended up in the Army just because that's where I was standing. So then I went to Fort Bliss, Texas. They didn't tell us that. They just put us on a plane, flew us down there. We got there in the middle of the night. They took us over to a mess hall and gave us some food, put us to bed, and the next day they told us we were in Texas. And that's where I did my basic training. When I first got there, I called up my dad. I told him that I was at Fort Bliss, Texas for basic training. And his first words were, "I did my basic training there when I went in the Army. Don't ask me to come and visit you." Because he didn't like it either. During basic training, I did very well. I had all the shots for Vietnam, all 21 of them. And I was supposed to go there, but the last week of our training, they changed my orders. Because I was a heavy equipment operator, they were starting a new Nike Herc missile outfit, the 333rd Artillery Unit. And they assigned me to that. And so I got a 2-week leave, came home, went back to El Paso, and that's where I stayed for the next 2 years. And I was in a Nike Herc missile outfit, and I was supposed to drive heavy equipment. I went to truck driver school in the military, got my military driver's license. I drove truck for 2 weeks. They put me in the supply room, and that's where I spent the next year and a half, 2 years. I became the supply sergeant, made E5 in 2 years, which was really hard. And when I was ready to get out of the Army, they offered me a $2,000 bonus and to send me to warrant officer school to become an officer. But I didn't care much for the military, so I left. When I was in basic training, I always hunted all my life. I was an excellent shot. I had shot deer at over 800 yards away. And in basic training, they take you out to the gun range and they give you an M14 and you fire at a target that's 25 yards away and you sight in your rifle. I sighted it in and I could put 3 bullets in a circle that you could drop a quarter over and cover it. And the day we were supposed to go out for live target shooting to qualify, they gave us our rifles and we took them up to our beds and we had to disassemble them, clean them, put them together. And I don't know if I knocked it off or one of the other guys hit my bunk and my rifle fell off and hit the ground. I picked it up, looked fine. We got out to the rifle range and they had targets, the pop-up targets. They would pop up from 25 yards to 300 yards. And you had so many seconds to find that target and shoot it. And I started shooting when it was my turn and I wasn't hitting anything. So I did like I do when I sighted in gun scopes. I found a rock in a dirt area and I aimed at it and I fired and my bullet was hitting off to the left. So I knew that my sight was bent a little bit. So I started shooting a little to the right of every target and I started knocking them down. I fired enough targets to qualify to move on, but not for expert. When I got into a regular unit and we went out and fired, I qualified for expert right off the bat. So that plus my driving experience, I think, is what kept me out.
My first year out of college, I lived with my mother. My father had passed away December when I was a senior in college, and I felt like maybe I could be a help and a support to her. After the first year, I moved into an apartment with 3 other girls in Sugar House. And we would go to the University of Utah dances on occasion, and that's often where we met the guys that we dated. During that time, Bob Stevens called my roommate Dixie and asked her on a date. He was from my stake. I had met him at what we called Men and Gleaners, which would be the equivalent of today's singles, young single adults. She was not able to go, and he never called her again. A year later, he called me and asked me on a date. This was in February of 1967. We went out on a date. We went out on another and another. And in May, we got engaged. Funny little story. I really liked him. He was the one that all the girls wanted to date. He surprised me. After a date one night, we were sitting out in front of our apartment, and he pulls out a ring. I was totally taken off guard. And he asked me to marry him. And surprised to me, I said, I don't know, I'll have to think and pray about it. And so the next night he took me out again, and I told him that yes, I would marry him. We then drove out to Sandy to visit his mom and my mom to tell them. He told me later that that was probably the best thing I could have done. I think he felt a little cocky about all the girls flooding to him and was kind of taken aback by the fact that I didn't just immediately jump on it. I don't know the first time I met him, but I know that during the year that I lived with my mom and I went to that group of young adults, we put on a program and we used a speakeasy theme, and he was in charge. And I was on the committee, and I remember riding up along the boulevard with him in his little Alfa Romeo on our way to get some information. And as we drove, we made plans for our activity. That's the first time I remember really spending any time with him or getting acquainted with him. He was everything a girl could want. He was intelligent. He was driven. He was a returned missionary. He was in engineering school. At one point, I double dated with him and my friend Dottie Long, and I went out a few times with his friend, David Webb. I never really liked David, but I thought Bob was cute. But I couldn't do anything about it because he was dating my friend Dottie. I think my mother said to Dottie one time, my mother asked Dottie one time if she was serious about Bob. And Dottie said no, she just enjoyed going with him. And my mother said, well, if you're not serious about him, I'm going to sick my daughter on him. So we got married in July 1967. And we moved to a little home in Sandy, a little old 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. He was still in school. The summer of 1967, after he finished school, he moved to Henderson, Nevada, to take a temporary internship there for the summer. He came home in July. We got married and moved to Henderson, where he had a little 1-bedroom apartment. Right before he was scheduled to return to Salt Lake, he started having some health problems. He'd had health problems for years, but it started to be a problem. So we gathered everything up into our little car and we drove to Salt Lake. We drove well into the night, and I had to drive part of the way because he was in terrible pain.
What was wrong?
He had hepatitis when he was 12, and he had liver problems ever since then. He also had ulcerative colitis. So we drove to Utah, and the next morning he immediately went to see a doctor. I think her name was Dr. Richards. She was older. She was brusque, but she was a great doctor. She put him right into the hospital, admitted him. They took out his gallbladder, and she did exploratory surgery. She cut an incision in him from right below his breastbones right down to his pelvic bone. And he had 3 large wire stitches as well as the regular stitches in. And I remember when we went to have those stitches taken out. She yanked those out and just about sent him flying every time. So he went right back to school after that and had another year of school left. Actually, he didn't go back till January because of the surgery, and he had another year and a half of school left. And then he started traveling different places in the country to look at different jobs, and these companies paid him to come, and sometimes they asked him to bring me with them. So we traveled to several places, New Jersey, Texas, so forth. And he took a job with Exxon Oil in Texas, in a town called Baytown, just out of Houston. We moved to Baytown. We got an apartment, and within 3 months we had bought a home, a small home.
I got out of the military on January 25th, 68. 2 years later, I went to work for Allied Development for a little while in the summertime because they offered me a job right off the bat. And I didn't want to work construction anymore because in those days there wasn't much work in the wintertime. So I worked for them for about 4 months, and I found there was a job offered at Gordon Wilson Chevrolet in Murray, and my cousin worked for General Motors, so he put in a good word for me. So I was hired at Gordon Wilson Chevrolet to drive delivery truck. I drove delivery truck for Gordon Wilson for about 6 months. They promised me a raise when I started there. They said, in 6 months, we'll give you a raise. 6 months later, they refused to give me the raise. And the parts manager that was there had quit and gone out to Roy Price Chevrolet in Bountiful. And he knew they wouldn't give me a raise because Gordon Wilson never gave anybody raises, from what I heard. So he called me up and asked me if I'd come to work for him out there. So I went to work for him out there for about 6, 8 more months, and then Streeter Chevrolet offered me a job of working inside, no more truck driving for them, on the counter. So I went to work for Streeter Chevrolet, and I worked there for 4 years. And then Dwayne Brown Chevrolet called me up, and they offered me a job to come to work for them for a lot more money. So I went to work for Dwayne Brown Chevrolet, and I worked there for just a week short of 10 years. At Streeter Chevrolet, there was a office girl there, lady, Ruth Anderson, and she hooked me up with her niece, who was going to BYU. She was from California. And so we went out on a blind date, and we dated, and we dated, and we dated, and finally I asked her to marry me. So we got married on 1971 on April 3rd. And I rented a house in Holiday at that time. And I rented it from my cousin, who worked for General Motors, who told me that he just bought a new house, and he says if I rented his house for one year, at the end of the year, he would apply part of the rent toward a down payment, and I could buy the house. At the end of the year, he said he couldn't afford to sell me the house because houses had gone up quite a bit during that year. So I immediately moved out, and we bought a brand new house in Sandy, and we moved into that. Oh, we just got along very good. She was very cute. She was 4 foot 10 inches tall, and I could put my chin on the top of her head, and we just got along. We were just made for each other.
When we had lived in Sandy, I had gotten pregnant and I had a miscarriage. So he and I had some tests done, and he was told that it was highly unlikely that he would ever father a child. I had endometriosis, so I was told that my chances were very slim. So we had talked about perhaps adopting, and when we got to Texas, our bishop and his wife had 2 adopted children. So we went to the Pelchin Faith Home where they had gotten their children and filled out all the paperwork to try to adopt a child. We hadn't been in our home more than a couple of months when Kathleen was born, and we were able to get her when she was 10 days old. Bob named Kathleen because he had a cousin that he was very close to, and he loved her and wanted his daughter named Kathleen. That was the one name I didn't want because I had a little girl in my first year of teaching who was such a little spitfire, and I said, I will never name a child Kathleen. But guess what? He won. So after about a year and a half, we went back to the Pelchin Faith Home to see about applying for another child. And we were told by our caseworker that there were very few children available anymore because girls were keeping their babies. And it would be 2 or 3 years before they could take our application. So we started looking around, found a lawyer in Salt Lake who had done quite a few adoptions. In the meantime, we got transferred to Billings, Montana. So the lawyer in Salt Lake said he used to do hundreds a year, and now he was doing just a few. And he had a list of 400 people waiting. So we didn't see much hope in him. We found a lawyer in Billings who said that once in a while he was able to place a child. So we gave him our name. Well, about a month before Kathleen turned 2, the lawyer in Billings called us and said, I have a girl who's going to have a baby probably the end of January. Would you like the baby? And of course we were thrilled. 2 weeks after Kathleen's birthday, we got a call from the lawyer in Salt Lake. There's a baby in California who was just born today if you want him. And we looked at each other and said, do we want to take this baby? We said, yes, we might never get another chance. And we wanted at least 3 children. So that would kind of satisfy what we wanted as a family. So Bob flew to California, picked up Daniel when he was 3 days old, brought him back to Billings. And in February, on the 21st, Ben was born in Billings. So I had a 2-year-old, a newborn, and a 3.5-month-old baby. When we picked up Ben at the hospital, he was 3 days old. Bob took me home, dropped us all off, and went back to work. Oh my goodness, I think I was a little freaked out.
She was told she could never have children. And after we'd been married about 4 years, we put in for adoption with the LDS Social Services. And we filled out all the paperwork, and about a year after we put in the paperwork, I was at work one day, and she had transferred from BYU to the University of Utah to finish her schooling. And she only had about 3 more months left of schooling to get her degree. And I was at work one day breaking the cash register drawers, counting the money, and I received a phone call from LDS Social Services. And they told me that they had a baby girl for us. And so I told them I couldn't come right away because my wife was in school at the University of Utah, and she took the bus from there down to Streeter Chevrolet every day. And then I had one of my parts drivers, pick her up and bring her down to where I worked, and then we would ride home together. And so I says, as soon as I can get a hold of my wife, we will come down and pick her up. And when I called Aunt Ruth, who worked at Streeter's, and told her to have Leslie call me as soon as she got there. And she called me when she got there, and I told her, and you could hear her scream all the way to where I was at. And we didn't want to drive all the way out to Sandy to get the clothes we had been already collecting for her. So we just went to ZCMI, we picked up some baby stuff, and we went down, and they had a 2-day-old little baby girl that was half Ute Indian, and we adopted her. And we named her Carrie Ann. It was amazing. I called my mom up. We first went right home, and I called my mom up, and I told my mom, I said, Mom, can I borrow your camera? Because we didn't even have a camera. And she said, yeah, you can borrow the camera. And I said, would you bring it out to me? And they lived in Holiday, and we lived in Sandy. And she said, if you think I'm going to stop and bring that camera all the way out to you, you got another thing coming. So I said, but Mom, we want to take pictures of our new baby. And I could hear my dad talking in the background. And I heard my mom turn around and say, shut up and put your shoes on, we're leaving. And so they came right out with a camera and we took pictures. They told us at LDS Social Services that it would be at least, at the minimum, 4 years before we could get another baby, because they had so many people wanting to adopt. And so we filled out some paperwork, and we weren't in any hurry because we had 4 years to wait. So we'd fill out a little paperwork here and a little bit of paperwork there and keep it updated. About 2 years after we had adopted Carrie, they called me up and they said, we want you to get your paperwork finished. And I said, well, does this mean we're going to get a baby sooner? And they said, not necessarily, but we want you to hurry up and get your paperwork finished. So we finished up the paperwork. We only had 1 or 2 forms left to do, get signatures from our bishop and a few things. And so I turned it in, and about a week later, my wife was supposed to go to California with her sister. And she hadn't seen her mother and her parents for quite a while, so she was really excited about going. And the trip fell through. And she was really upset that she didn't get a chance to go to California to visit her parents. And I got up that morning and I told her, I just had a feeling. I says, you're not supposed to go to California because we're going to get a baby today. And she thought I was crazy. And I said, they're going to call me at 11 o'clock, just like before, and we'll go down and pick up a baby. Oh, yeah. She didn't think that was right, because it had only been just not quite 2 years. And, well, it had been a little over 2 years. And so I went to work. 11 o'clock came, nothing happened. But 11:30, I got a phone call, and they said, we have a baby boy for you. So we went down and picked up our son, Brandon. And it was me and Leslie and Carrie.
And what year is this?
This would be 75, 76. I don't know, I'm not good on dates. Anyway, we went down to pick him up, and they took Carrie from us and took her in to help change his diaper and left us in the room. So she got to see him before we did. And they told us that they'd been holding him for us for 3 months, waiting for us to get everything finished. So he was 3 months old. He was born in Hidalgo County, Texas. And they flew him up from Texas just for us.
And why? Why you guys?
He's had a DNA test since then. And he is 90% Mayan Indian. But he looks so much like Carrie because she's half Ute Indian. And to this day, I cannot tell their baby pictures apart. They look so much alike when they were little. Still working at Dwayne Brown. Very happy. I'm the assistant parts manager there. And then the parts manager got made parts and service director, so I took over the whole parts department. And then Dwayne Brown got in trouble with General Motors. General Motors finally forced him clear out of business. And that's when they brought in Jerry Seiner. It became Jerry Seiner Chevrolet. I did most of the inventories for the parts department and service of all the equipment and parts. And I saw Jerry Seiner and the guy from GM that was overseeing the buyout cheat Dwayne out of a lot of money. Thousands of dollars. I figured if he's going to cheat Dwayne, what's he going to do to me? I left Jerry Seiner Chevrolet and we sold our house, packed up everything, and moved to California. And they were making good money in Bakersfield, California, in the oil fields. And I went there to go to work in the oil fields. I started applying at the oil fields, but none of them would hire me because I had absolutely no experience in oil business. And my father-in-law, who was the bishop at the time in the ward, his elders quorum president had a oil field related company that supplied equipment and pipe and stuff to the oil fields. He knew Mr. Strickland, Richard Strickland, who owned Motor City Auto Center, a GMC truck dealer, little teeny dealership. And he asked me if I would go down and talk to him. And I went down and talked to him. And he asked me to submit a resume, which I did. And then he said, I would like to hire you as the assistant parts manager. And I said, that's fine. He says, I want you to start in about a week. I said, okay. I says, I'll work here until I can find a job in the oil fields because it pays a lot more money. A day or two before I was to start, he called me up and he said, I need for you to come to work tomorrow. I had to fire my parts manager because I caught him stealing, and I want you to take over the parts department. So I went to work for him with the understanding that if I got a job in the oil fields for a little more money, I was going to leave. So 32 years later, I was still working for him because it was a nice place to work. He was a super nice guy. We get along real good, and I still talk to him today.
The beginning of August of that year, Bob got sick again, and we flew to Salt Lake with our 3 babies, and he went back to see his doctor, Dr. Richards, and she told me that she could operate, but she thought she would probably lose him on the operating table. And he died the next day on the 4th of August, 1972. He had so much fluid on his lungs, they were drawing off quarts and quarts of fluid.
So what was wrong with him?
His liver. But they did an autopsy and discovered that he also had stomach cancer, which was just beginning. So I have to be thankful that he wasn't suffering with stomach cancer for months or years before he died, with me trying to take care of him and 3 little children. We had found out just not too long, couple of months, few months, maybe May, that I was pregnant, which was never supposed to happen. Well, you're numb. You're just numb. I don't know any other way to put it. You can't think ahead too far. You can't organize your thoughts. I remember waking up the next morning with a start, something's wrong, and then I realized what had happened, and you just feel sick. So I had to go through all the things you have to go through when somebody dies. You have to go to the funeral home and pick out a casket. You have to meet with the bishop and make plans. You have to talk to all the people that come by and want to tell you how sorry they are. At that point, I didn't really make any plans, except that I knew I couldn't stay in Billings. We had a good marriage, but we had to work on a lot of issues because we didn't communicate very well. He was very outgoing, very driven, knew where he was going, what he wanted to do, and I was about the opposite. I was shy. I was non-confrontational. I just kind of went along with him because I felt like I should, and I didn't have enough self-confidence to do anything else. I'm not sure he's going to like me when he sees me again, because I've changed a lot.
For the better?
Yes, I think so. I kept feeling like, why would the Lord take him when I need him? I had 3 little kids and I was pregnant. That's one of the first things I learned to do, was be a little bit assertive. So my in-laws went with me to Billings to pack up all my stuff and bring it back here. And then I moved in with them. That was August. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law were also living there because they had started building a home just a little bit north in a new subdivision. And they said to me, they're building a house right next to ours. Why don't you buy it and live next door to us? Which I thought was a good idea. So I lived there. I think Larry and Sheila moved into their house before Christmas. I moved into my house right after that. Maybe it was before Thanksgiving.
And you were still pregnant?
Yes. Moved into the house. My in-laws had a foster daughter from the Indian placement program named Marlene, who'd lived with them for several years. And they talked to her, and she said she would come and live with us for the rest of her junior year and for her senior year to help me out a little. So Marlene came to live with us, and during the next few years, my mother was such a help to me. She would come over several evenings a week, have dinner with us, then help me bathe all the babies and get them ready for bed. Sometimes she would bring her sister Beth, my aunt, and she would help. I would put the 4 little ones in the tub, wash them up, and they would come one at a time and take one of them out to the living room and dry them off and get them all dressed. My brother-in-law, who lived next door to me, Larry, said that when the time came for Laura to be born, he would be happy to take me to the hospital, and that when they asked him at the desk the name of the father of the baby, he would say, well, I'm not the father, and all of her children have different fathers. He was a crack-up. Well, he didn't take me to the hospital. My mother, after I was in labor all night, for several hours the next day, she took me to the hospital and stayed with me all day, and I don't know who took care of the other kids. But the doctor was determined that I would stay in the hospital for 4 days because he felt like I needed the rest. Laura was born early evening on the 27th of February 1973. And the first thing I remember when I saw her was her long, thin fingers. And she was born about 5:20 or 5:30 on the 27th of February, 1973. And I remember the beautiful spirit that was in the room when she was born. And I think that happens with all mothers and babies. I don't think I was allowed to hold her right away. Maybe for a few hours. But I have to say that when any of my babies were put into my arms, it was the same feeling. You were a mother, and it didn't matter whether you gave birth to them or not. I love the name. It's just kind of soft and lyrical, and I always liked that name, and I didn't have anyone opposing me, so I named her what I wanted to name her. It's interesting because I'd never had 4 children with any spousal help, And we just worked around the clock. My mother-in-law came and stayed at night for the first week and got up to feed Laura in the middle of the night, which I really appreciated. And that way I was able to sleep at least a little bit during the night. Laura would not nurse, and I figured if a bottle was good enough for the other three, it was good enough for her. My father-in-law did not agree. He was rather upset about it, but that's the way it was. I remember the bishop coming to call me to be the primary chorister. And I said, Bishop, I don't see how I can do this with all these little children. And he told me that if I would accept, I would be blessed. And everything went fine. I recall sitting down on the floor with diapers and bottles and 3 little babies in front of me on the floor and changing their diapers and holding their bottles while they ate. And that went on for a little while until the 2 boys were off the bottle or could hold their own. My mother came several nights a week and helped me bathe the babies and get them ready for bed. Sometimes she brought my Aunt Beth, who was her sister, and lived with her. That was such a great help to me. And every week my mother would say to me, when can I tend the children this week so that you can go do something and get out of the house? My mother was in her late 50s, so it couldn't have been easy for her to tend 4 little kids for a few hours, but she did it. And as they got older, I found a couple of older girls in our ward who were willing to come and tend 4 little children. Kathleen was probably 4, a year or a year and a half before kindergarten. I felt badly that everything she tried to do had little fingers interfering, lots of little fingers. A lady down the street was a teacher at a Montessori school on 7200 South. She offered to take Kathleen with her 2 days a week at no cost to me and let her play with the other children there and do the activities. Then I would load the other children in the car and we would go pick up Kathleen. When my children were in grade school, my mother and I planned a trip to Disneyland to take the children. She would go with me. But Kathy would get upset if she knew ahead. When are we going? Is it time yet? And so we didn't tell the children. I woke them up one morning. I had prepared little activity bags for them and books to have in the car. And I said, how would you like to go to Disneyland today? So I picked up my mother and we all went to Disneyland together. I had made them shirts and we had a good time. That was a fun experience. We tried to do a little traveling from time to time. We would go to Fairview to Uncle George and Aunt Peggy's house for a couple days, or to Idaho to see Uncle Craig and Aunt Diane. No, not Aunt Diane. His second wife, Aunt Pat.
Well, I came home from work one day and my wife wasn't feeling good. She was in the primary presidency and she was over the Cub Scouts. And she was having a meeting that night. And so we had about 6-8 people there for a Cub Scout meeting. And she just kept getting worse and worse. So she went in and laid down on the bed and I took over the meeting for her. And her parents stopped by on their way to dinner. And her mother went in to talk to her while I was running the meeting. And she came out and she said, we need to send everybody home and I've called an ambulance. It was 1983. And just 1st of November. And Ray would have been, what, 6? And Brandon would have been 4 or 5. We went to the hospital and the doctor checked her out and they couldn't find out what was wrong. So they were going to keep her for a few days. And so I called work and just told them I'm not coming in for a few days. They got to checking her out and said she's got a heart problem and we want to transfer her to a different hospital. And so I called my mom and dad and told them, and they had immediately packed the car and headed down to help. We transferred her over to another hospital, and when they put her in an ambulance, she went into a semi-coma. And they kept telling me, we can't transfer her unless she gives us the okay. And finally she woke up and said, okay. So we transferred her over there. The minute we got over there, a really nice surgeon had checked her out and rushed her right into emergency surgery. And she had a major artery to her heart was clogged and had split open and sent blood clots throughout her whole body. And one of them went to her bowels and cut off the blood to her bowels, and they had to remove several feet of her intestines. And then they put her in intensive care. And she stayed there a little over a week, and then she passed away because some of them went to her brain. High cholesterol ran in her family.
A few years before I met Ray, I had been praying about wanting to meet somebody, feeling like I needed some support. And I got a very clear answer that yes, I would meet someone, but not yet. So I just waited. At the end of 1983, a couple in our ward told me they had a relative in California who had just lost his wife, and when he was ready to date, they wanted to introduce us to each other. This was Ray Herman, and he was related to Lyle Coons. Lyle Coons' cousin was Ray's first wife.
And Lyle Coons is who to you?
He was in my ward at the time. He and his wife Sandy, and we were friends. About May of 1984, well, my mother passed away in February of 1984. And in May, I knew that I was going to meet somebody.
After 9 months, my mother-in-law came to me and she handed me a paper. And she said, it's time for you to start dating, and here's a list of single women.
Wow.
So I started dating.
What was that like?
It was interesting at first.
The Spirit just spoke to me and said, I just knew something was going to happen. One Sunday in May, I was asked to substitute teach in Relief Society. And I gave the lesson, and afterwards, one of my friends, Joanne Steinagel, came up to me and she said, you look like somebody who's in love. What are you not telling me? And I said to her, I feel like I am. Just that wonderful, euphoric feeling. But I don't know who with. It was strange, but it was absolutely a miracle. And I look back now, and pulling up roots, selling your house, taking your 4 kids off to California, you aren't going to do that unless you are darn sure that what you're doing is right. Ray came to Utah in July. Towards the end of July of 1984.
We had all scheduled a trip to Utah for the summer. My brother-in-law was quite the outdoorsman, and he did survival trips for BYU into the desert for a few years. He also became a guide on the Salmon River in Idaho, down the River of No Return. And he wanted us all to go down the river and do a float trip. And so we came to Utah, and one of my cousins from my first wife knew Ann, and she set us up on a blind date, first date. So while I was here to go on the trip, I went out with her.
Lyle and Sandy called me up and said, Ray Herman is coming on vacation and we want you to go out with him. So my friend Rosemarie Johnson in the ward went with me to Mervyn's. If anybody remembers Mervyn's, I loved Mervyn's. And I picked out a new dress. It was purple and white. Just a cute little perky dress. And he came to pick me up to take me to dinner. He was dressed in gray slacks and a blue sports coat and a red tie.
Well, I showed up a little early, and she apologized, said she was running late. I told her, no, I'm early.
I thought he was cute. He had a mustache. He was starting to bald, which didn't bother me. And very polite.
I thought she was very cute, and we got along really well, and we enjoyed each other, and we had a really good time.
So we went to a place called the 13th floor, which was the top floor of a very famous hotel downtown, which is not there anymore. But we had a lovely dinner, and then we went driving around, and he drove me up by the Capitol, and we looked over the city, and we talked. I believe that was probably a Saturday night. And the next day he came and picked me up in the evening, and we went to look at homes that were being built. We both were interested in architecture and house plans and that sort of thing. And then the next day he was scheduled to leave with his brother-in-law and sister-in-law and go to Idaho to run the River of No Return. So we made plans to see each other when he got back. Well, he came home early because he wanted to see me. And he brought me a beautiful pair of earrings that he had picked out for me. He's a very romantic guy. And we went out several times in the time he had left, and after he left, I was crestfallen that he was gone, but we talked every day on the phone, sent cards and letters back and forth, and he had flowers sent to me when he left. So I got a big bouquet of flowers from him.
She came to California and spent a few days there, and we went out of there a lot and spent a lot of time together. And
He was just so easy to talk to. He was so polite. He just, I wasn't sure I was going to like him because he was not everything I thought I wanted. He was not a college graduate. He was not a returned missionary. He was successful with his career, but he was just, I just knew right from the first. I just was never any doubt in my mind. So.
Did he kiss you?
Oh yeah, the first date.
The first date?
The first date.
How was that?
It was wonderful. He just slid right over in the truck and laid one on me, and I loved it.
I just felt it was right because she was just so friendly and nice and good to be around.
A funny story that happened while he was there that first time. He came by the house one night. We were going to go for a walk. We walked down the street and over to Sandy City Park by the old Sandy Elementary. We sat in the swings and we talked. And we talked. We got home, and there was Daniel sitting on the porch with all the lights blazing in the house. And he said, "Where have you two been? I've been worried about you." So that was kind of funny. He was 12 years old. So he went back to Bakersfield with his children, and as we talked on the phone during the next week, I was brave enough to say to him, "What if I come there to visit for a few days?" "Oh, I'd like that. I kind of wanted to ask you, but I didn't know if you would like that idea." So I flew to California. He picked me up in LA, brought me home. I spent about 3 or 4 days there. He was at that time living in his home on Surrey Lane, and his in-laws were living with him to help him with his 2 children. Mm-hmm. So they were there the whole time that I was there, and I got to know them. Wonderful people. I came back to Utah, and 3 weeks later he came to Utah again to see me over Labor Day. And that's when we got engaged. He came to our house in Sandy with 3 diamond rings, and he gave one to me and one to each of my girls.
Oh.
Just little teeny diamond chips, you know. But that was such a cute gesture. He was so thoughtful. He still is. He went back to California. Well, we set a wedding date at that time, 6 weeks hence in October. So I went to California one more time so we could decide what I should bring and what I should get rid of. Then I went back. I was teaching school again by then and had started my 3rd year of teaching again. And so I started packing and had a yard sale. They thought it was going to be so exciting to have a dad. Mm-hmm. Things exploded a little bit later on. I should have taken more time to talk things over with them, to make them more aware of what was happening. I was just so happy and in a daze, and they all seemed to be happy too that we were going to get a dad finally. And it was like a new adventure to them. Mm-hmm. So Ray came on a day or 2 before our wedding day, went to get our license, finished packing up, and then we got married for time only in the Jordan River Temple. After the ceremony, we went to my neighbor's house, Colleen and Bruce Hymas, where they had set up for a little reception for us, just cookies and punch and water, and had a reception back there, and the weather started to turn bad. And then Sheila and Larry had us over for dinner, and then we left on our honeymoon. We went to Jackson Hole. It's not easy to blend a family.
I kind of started it off on a humorous note because Mr. Strickland, at that time I was driving Mini Jimmys, and I told him I was getting married and she had 4 kids. And so he told me to go pick out a Suburban and start driving Suburbans as demos. And so I drove a Suburban up here. We got married. We went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming on our honeymoon. We came back and we picked up the kids, and the moving company, Mr. Strickland paid for the moving company to move us there. And the truck was there loading. And we loaded up the truck, and it left for California, and we left. And it was late at night on I think it was a Saturday night. We were just outside Bakersfield. It was just getting dark. And her 2 boys asked me, he says, "Where are we going to stay when we get to your house?" And I said, "Well," I says, "the first night I'll let you stay upstairs. But," I says, "after that you got to sleep in the basement."
So the next morning, we were still asleep, and we heard the next door neighbor yelling, "Shut up over there!" Well, Ray got up and went outside, and Benjamin and Daniel were outside looking for the entrance to the basement because there were no stairs in the house. There are no basements in Bakersfield. So things went along pretty well for a while, and then personalities started to conflict with each other. One of them wouldn't like something the other one did, and vice versa. And Brandon was quite a bit younger than the boys. He was 5 years younger. and they would kind of corner him and make him do things, and he didn't like that. One thing we did that was so good for our marriage, Ray took me out every Friday night on a date. And we left the kids at home, and we left food for them and instructions and said, "You are on your own." Once in a while, somebody would be gone to a friend's house, so they wouldn't be there. Most particularly Laura.
Well, we had 6 kids, and we learned to live with it. We tried to do things as a family. We tried to take them to the beach and stuff. We bought a tent trailer. We'd take them camping. We would take the Suburban, and we had a blow-up air mattress, and we would lay down all the seats in the Suburban, put the air mattress in there, and me and Ann would sleep in the Suburban. We'd put all the kids out in the tent or in the tent trailer, whichever we were camping with. I always tell them, I says, we're going to sleep in there because if the bears come, they can get you. Kid with them. And we did some fishing and took them fishing at the aqueduct and up on the river a few times.
At one point, Ray's in-laws were giving Carrie and Brandon lovely gifts for their birthdays and for Christmas, like art lessons, things that were really thoughtful. They were giving my children a bag of M&Ms and a pair of socks. And Ray and I talked about it. And Ray said, "I think I know just what to do." So he went to them and he said, "I would really like you to give Carrie and Brandon a bag of M&Ms and a pair of socks for their birthday and their Christmas, so that the kids feel like they're all equal." And so they did. I thought that was so wise of him, rather to confront them and say something like, "Why don't you give the other kids something better?" He just has so much wisdom, and he always tries to be fair with the kids, even now.
Couldn't wait to retire. I mean, I really like Mr. Strickland. I like my job. When I first started there, as I said, it was the smallest GMC truck dealership probably in California. And Mr. Strickland's a wonderful guy, but at that point, he wasn't gung-ho on really building things up. And me, I was out to get every piece of business I could get my hands on. And the Chevrolet dealer there's only 2 big dealers, one big dealer in town was a Chevrolet dealer. He had all the business. And he treated everybody like dirt. If somebody bought a part from him, they could never return it to him. And so I decided that I was going to not be that way, and I was going to take everything I could away from that Chevrolet dealer because of the way he treated customers. And so we started building up the dealership. The first full year I was at the dealership, for the first time ever, they did $1 million in parts sales. And after about 5 or 6 years, we bought out the Buick dealership. And so we had GMC and Buick. And then after about 15 years, Penske Cadillac never did good in Bakersfield, because when he first moved there, he built a whole new dealership in the auto mall, and he never used any local contractors to do anything. So the people in town didn't care much for him. So he sold out to Richard Strickland, and we took over his whole facility, which gave us Buick, Pontiac, GMC, Isuzu medium duty, Saturn, and Lexus. We had all those car lines. Saturn and Lexus were 2 separate dealers in separate buildings. And I was put over all of it to watch over all the parts departments. And the dealership was way too small as far as the parts department goes for us. So I rented a 12,000 square foot warehouse for the parts department to keep our parts in, besides the one at the store. And within about 3 years, it was too small. So we had to rent another one. So we had 24,000 square feet. Mr. Strickland made me the parts and service director, which means that I was over all 4 parts departments, all 4 service departments, and the body shop. So I had close to 200 employees that I had to oversee. Our parts department, we grew it to the point to where when I finally retired, we were doing $1 million every month in parts sales in just the GM parts department. And in the Lexus and parts department, we were doing pretty close to $1 million a month. Of course, Saturn, GM discontinued Saturn and Pontiac, so we lost those car dealerships. Just before he bought out Penske, he brought in a general manager. And the general manager's instructions were he could run the front end of the store, but he was not to bother me in the back end of the store. But little by little, he kept creeping back there, and I'd go to managers' meetings, and I would make suggestions about changes to be made to the shop, mainly, that would make us more efficient. I would analyze the mechanics and what we sold, and I set up a program to put the mechanics that use the most parts closest to the parts department, and the mechanics that use the fewest amount of parts the furthest away from the parts department, to make it more efficient. And that we put on a parts runner so the mechanics could call in on the intercom, order the parts they needed, and stay in their stall working, and they would move that out. And I talked to him about it at first, and he said, no, we don't want to do that. And then 2 months later in the managers meeting, when all the managers are there, he brings up the exact same idea as it's his idea and wants to do all this. And he was always doing stuff like that. And I just got to the point to where you couldn't trust him. He would tell you something, and then he would do the exact opposite. He was very smart in the front end of the store, and he made the company a lot of money on new cars and used cars. But he was really, I just didn't get along with him. So I decided to retire. So I retired a year earlier than I would have. I would have worked at least one more year. So I retired and told Mr. Strickland I was going to retire and move back to Utah.
I hope to be remembered as a kind and generous person. I have a theory, and it's just my own theory. I believe everybody that's born into this world has handicaps or problems or propensities that they need to learn to live with or deal with or overcome. I know exactly what mine are, but I feel like I have overcome several of the things that I don't like about myself. And I'm grateful for the atonement so that I could repent and be forgiven, and it's remembered no more. And I think everybody has things like that. My one regret in life is that I didn't listen more and talk less. I can look back and see that I tried to be strict with my children, and sometimes I didn't listen to them. I just knew what I wanted. And I think things would have been better served if I had been a better listener. I'm learning now to be a better listener. And I can look back and see that there are several lessons that I feel like I've really needed to learn in life. in order to be a better person and better prepared for where I want to go. My big problem that I feel like I needed to overcome in life was my temper. And I never knew I had a temper until I had children. My father never mastered his temper, as far as I know. He died at 49. I was not pleased with myself on many occasions when my temper got the best of me. But as I prayed over the years, it would always be upsetting to me, and I would always pray, please take this away from me. I don't like myself when I lose my temper. And one day, I had an experience with one of my children where I literally felt my heart change. And instead of arguing back with that child, I was able to say, I'm sorry you feel that way because I love you. And it all just went away. As much flack as I've taken from most of my children over the years, I still love them all. That hasn't changed anything. I still have one son that will not speak to us. He's the third child that's done that. And yet I love him dearly, just like all the rest of them. And I've tried to let them know that.
I know that sometimes I didn't make the best decisions with our kids, and sometimes I still make dumb decisions, I think. We all do the best we can. I've tried hard to do the best, and I know some of our kids won't agree, but I have worked really hard to try to treat all of them the same, all 6 of them, and be fair with all 6 of them. And I hope they understand that they're all special souls, and I want them all to be happy and have the things that they need, not the things that they necessarily want, but the things that they need to make them happy. Like I told my daughter and her husband when they were having marital problems, that you need to go to a church. Richard belonged to one church and Carrie belonged to our church, and I told them to decide, either go to Richard's church or go to our church, but spend time at church and serving Heavenly Father. Our son, Brandon, he's a great guy. I love him, but for a while we had a hard time. But when he married Kelly, he started going to church, and it really turned him around. And it's not our church, but it is a church. And I think that's important for every single one of them.
I think the thing that used to matter most to me in life was that they all walked the straight and narrow. I wanted them all to be not only successful in life, but active members of the church. And they are not. And I've come to terms with that. I realize that they came with things. All of them come with things. We all come with things that we inherit. And they're different from what yours are. And so they can't all be expected to do just what you want them to do. My plan when I was young was to have 9 perfect children. And I didn't get any perfect children because there are no perfect children. But I got the ones that Heavenly Father knew I needed, who would teach me what I needed to learn. So I don't have any regrets about any of it. The thing that matters most to me in this life is living the gospel. I've always had a testimony, and I've always had faith. And I know where I want to go when I leave this life, and it to be with family and loved ones again. And I know that their stories aren't written. They're not finished. I know that Heavenly Father will take into consideration everything they've dealt with and been through in this life.
I think one of the most important things that I would like them to know, that most of them won't agree with me, is the church. And knowing that we'll all be together sometime, and it's their choice where they go and what they make of their lives. But I've enjoyed serving in the church. I spent 25 straight years in the bishopric. The last 5 years I really enjoyed, when I spent 5 years as the branch manager at the Taft Federal Prison. I really enjoyed working with the prisoners, and we converted a lot of prisoners, and a lot of them joined the church after they got out. So I really enjoyed that part. And knowing that we can be family forever if we live worthy, and just the feeling you get when you go to church and helping others and doing the things that you should be doing.
Carrie has shown a great deal of resilience and has blossomed into a beautiful woman, and has grasped onto the gospel again, and gone to the temple, been sealed to her husband, and I'm really grateful for that. And Laura, she gave me a few pained moments during her life, like the time she got arrested. She has stayed close to the gospel her whole life, and been an example not only to other people but to me. And I love her sense of humor and her adventuresome spirit, which I never had. I'm sure she got that from her dad. But she is a friend to everyone, and she has a lot of wisdom, and I respect her for the choices she's made. The gospel is of utmost importance to me because I understand the plan of salvation, and that it's for families to be together again. And when I was younger, I sometimes felt like a failure because my children were not loving the gospel as I did. At least some of them were not. And it's still important to me, but I realize I cannot make their choices for them. That's a choice that I have, that I would make, but not them. But I respect their agency and their choices and love them anyway. I think I'm a good friend. I have a lot of talents, but I've noticed over the years my talents do not involve sharing them in public with audiences. I don't do athletics. I don't play the piano. I'm not a great dancer. I love to sew. I love to do handwork. I love to read. I have started the last couple or 3 years making dishcloths that I take to the empty nesters on their birthday in our ward. And I enjoy doing that. I love doing things with other people. Ray and I have several groups of friends in our neighborhood that we play games with, go on trips with, spend evenings together, go out to dinner. I love doing that. I love sewing and crocheting and reading. I love doing things with Ray. We still have a date night every week. And he's just always so generous and kind and thoughtful, and that brings me a lot of joy. I love hearing from my children. I love spending time with my children when I can, even though they live far away. I'm a grandmother to 12 and a great-grandmother to 2.
I think Mary and Ann, well, both my wives, but Ann especially, because we've spent so much time together. We enjoy each other. We enjoy doing things together. And so I think that has been that. And of course, I've always loved my woodworking, and I've loved making furniture.
Hi, puppy. You don't like avocado either. Your relationship changes a little bit when you get older. I think your love deepens in a different way. It's not all twitterpation and excitement like it was. It's just a quiet, comfortable, wonderful experience. I'm bossy.
She is the boss. She's just cute and easy to get along with. She puts up with me.
What do you guys both think the secret to marriage is, since you're both about to hit 40 years together?
A date every week, for one thing.
Yeah. When I was bishop, that's what I would counsel people to do. It says if you want to have a happy family, you have a family home evening once a week, whatever night fits you, whether it's Monday or not, and take your wife out on a date once a week. And I think in all the years we've been married, we've probably only missed maybe half a dozen weeks where we haven't been out on a date.
And that's because one of us was either in the hospital or out of town, and sometimes we made it up.
Yep.
And what's your favorite date?
Well, our most unusual date was one night it was my turn to choose, and so I called a pizza place and we went to the local park and we spread a blanket and all the trimmings, drinks, and whatever else, and the pizza was delivered to the park and we had dinner together by candlelight at the park.
How long ago was that?
25
Long
years
time ago.
probably.
Ray, what's been your favorite date?
We had a lot of them. One of them I really liked was one time I set it up and we went out to the train station and we got on the train and we took the train up about, what was it, 75 miles to the town above Bakersfield. We got off the train, went to a Chinese restaurant and had dinner, went to a movie, and then caught the train home.
Lovely.
That was fun.
What's the most romantic thing he's done for you, Ann?
Oh my goodness, put me on the spot.
Kissed you on the first date.
He did do that.
I see you told that story.
Of course I did. The most romantic thing he did. Oh, brother. He does a lot of romantic things.
Don't look
Help
at me.
me out.
Don't look at me. You're on your own.
I have no clue.
What's the one time she's made you feel really loved, Ray? Tell me about the one time Ann's made you feel very loved.
I hope there's more than one.
Oh, she always does that. She does special things for me all the time. So
We used to leave notes for each other. We used to do little coupon books for each other. We used to take an item, like a little round rubber ball, and hide it. The other person would find it, and then they would hide it somewhere for the other one to find. And we still once in a while do things like that. But one thing he didn't like that I did was I would make a cake. I used to make cakes, and I would make a cake and send one to work on his birthday. He didn't like that much, so I had to quit.
Why? Why didn't you like cakes at work, Ray?
I don't know. It was always a fight at work to see who got it, who got what. And you have 30-something guys fighting over a cake.
It was a big cake. It was like a big full sheet cake, not a little quarter, but a big one.
Do you guys feel really blessed that you found each other? Because most people can't stay together as long as you guys have.
Oh, yes. He has been the greatest husband, and he's been such a good father. And I just feel comfortable with him, and I love him to death. I love going out on dates with him. And
She especially loves her rubber chicken. I have a rubber chicken that squawks when you squeeze it, and sometimes I stick it in my pillow and she lays down at night and it squawks.